Welcome to The Next Standard, a peer to peer discussion where experienced physicians share how new technologies move from early adoption to everyday clinical practice. Each episode focuses on real decisions, real workflows, and what truly changes patient care. This series explores electrophysiology and robotic navigation, bringing practical insights from physicians actively implementing these technologies in their centers. I am Dauren Balgazin, partnering with leading electrophysiology centers across the Gulf and CIS to advance robotic programs. Today, we are joined by our distinguished guest, Dr. Peter Weiss. Dr. Weiss is a cardiac electrophysiologist at Banner University of Arizona Medical Center, Phoenix. After 14 years with Intermountain Healthcare in Salt Lake City, he moved to Phoenix in September 2019 and is associate professor at University of Arizona College of Medicine, director of ventricular arrhythmia management and robotics, and director of the EP lab in the center. He has long-standing interest in the use and evaluation of technology in medicine, particularly in the area of robotics. In clinical practice, he has performed over 1,500 robotic ablation procedures for both atrial and ventricular arrhythmias and has mentored providers in robotic ablation worldwide. He has advised many medical technology companies and worked with healthcare investors as a consultant. He is founding board member and recent president of the Society for Cardiac Robotic Navigation. Over the past 3 years, he has been the steering committee chairman of the Medical Device Innovation on Consortium EP Early Feasibility Study Initiative, which has now evolved into EP Collaboratory, based at Stanford, for which he is co-chair. He continued to participate in an active clinical practice with focus on complex ablation and is an investigator in several ongoing clinical research projects. He lives in Scottsdale, Arizona, with his wife, daughters, and dogs. Welcome to the podcast. Could you please share your story with robotics? What led you to consider robotics in your everyday practice?
This goes pretty far back now, and I think folks might be surprised about how long this technology has actually been available. So it actually starts back in 2008 or so, where I was in Salt Lake City with Intermountain Healthcare at the time. We'd built a new hospital. This technology was relatively new at the time, and our hospital decided to go ahead and invest in it. At the time, it was and really has remained a major capital investment, requiring a room build out that included magnetic shielding, like you might for an MRI suite, purchase of a very expensive robotic system, and really a dedication to moving towards that technology at a time that it was really just beginning. I had early experience in being involved with technologies just from my training, and I have a master's degree in technology assessment, have done that kind of work as just part of my interest. So part of it is a labor of love in that way, where I've always been very forward-looking in my career as far as how technology may be able to benefit our patients and our practice. And clearly robotics seemed to be a way that this was going to go one way or another, no matter how long it took. I think 15 years on, I'm a little surprised by how long it's taken, but we can talk about that journey for sure. I was interested early on and had a good experience very early on with the capabilities of this technology, with a very difficult procedure that was unable to be successfully treated using traditional techniques. And I saw very quickly in that particular case how it could provide unique treatment to our patients in certain circumstances. It's also been clear that it can't just be a tool for special occasions. In order to have long-term stability and presence in the care of our patients, it really needs to become an everyday tool to really make it. And it's taken a long time to get there. I can certainly share more about those details.
Thank you. Question comes to my mind. In that time, did your colleagues have misconception or maybe skepticism to that technology? Maybe I'm asking in terms of the relearning route of the catheter manipulation. If they can do it physically very fast, why they would relearn something? Can you comment on that, please?
I think there's two different aspects that really led to the challenges of adoption here. One is what you're alluding to, which is the practice of the individual electrophysiologist. We've become very, very good with our hands, and we've done that based upon the necessities of the tools that we have at our disposal. If you start off at the very beginning of the biophysics of how ablation is done, We have our manual catheters that by definition have to be somewhat stiff because you have the handle with a lever that can, manipulate pull wires that then bend the tip of the catheter, and all this has to be moved from next to the patient's hip. So there's this connection that has to go from the handle all the way to the tip. And so you have some stiffness and limited range of mobility with these tools in a flexible moving system, which is the heart. So I'll always maintain that from the very beginning, we have a bit of a mismatch between the technology and the treatment goals. That being said, that's what we've had to use. And I think that we've become very good with our hands. And I think there's a certain amount of pride that goes into that and a certain amount of efficiency that has been the case. At the same time, the idea of using a different biophysics and magnetic navigation with a flexible moving catheter that has unlimited degrees of freedom and movement, would be a better technology match for the tissues we're trying to treat, right? Because of magnetic pull, it will actually move with the tissue, allow for optimal contact, improve safety because it can't perforate, all those things that we've come to appreciate. But I think what led to that issue at the very beginning and the slow adoption and the skepticism included the following. So again, number one, the position of most EP docs who are very proud of and skilled with their hands. Do I really need this? Number two is challenges actually with the technology rollout, the structure of the company and how it was all done in the beginning, going way back. And the company is under very different management now than it was then. And I think it's a good lesson in business development history, where this was a technology that in some ways was a bit before its time, in some ways was rolled out before it was optimized, and was really overpromised and underdelivered from the very beginning to many of the most important KOLs and important people in the field. And so, unfortunately, it quickly got the reputation of being a very expensive, not very useful tool that would lengthen procedures and not necessarily improve outcomes early on. And I think it really dug itself a perceptive hole that it's been trying to dig itself out of from the, ever since. So I think those were the major initial barriers. And those of us who have continued to work with it over time, I think have done so out of a sincere belief that in the long run, this will evolve and change and come to take its place, as robotics really has in almost every other area of medicine and every other area of, advanced technical work in all areas of endeavor. And so I think it's been a challenge, but it really has taken champions at the local sites to really continue to see the benefit and move this forward. So I think those are the main limitations early on, and why you see major centers that initially adopted, then moved away. But we can certainly talk later about the fact that I think that is starting to swing now back in the other direction, and we have some newer technology options, et cetera, that will hopefully do well. The other thing that is related to that is that we had very limited progress in the technology itself due to some business relationships early on, where just now, for instance, we are going to be able to access a new mapping and ablation catheter that is actually owned by the Stereotaxis company itself, as opposed to relying on third-party strategic vendor that really had no interest in progressing the technology. I'm still today going to go do a procedure after this that uses the same catheter that I used in 2008. That's a real shame. And I think that now we finally have the ability to move that forward, but it's taken a long time and changing of those business relationships, et cetera, to get there.
Can I have one maybe personal questions? Did robotics change your confidence? I mean, procedural consistency, and did it change maybe the environment of the team inside the hospital?
So I think yes to all of those from my perspective. Again, because I was a champion of this from early on, we developed a team in our lab that was very much focused and dedicated on this. We had some individuals that really became expert in patient setup and how to, the patient experience and the procedure setup, et cetera, is really not that much different. But just like with anything, if you take the key steps along the way, it's very easy. But it really takes the team to understand that. And just like anything new, you just need to adjust. So we had great pride. Actually, many of our team members went on to teach other centers. And I think it gave me a lot of confidence. I actually have a practice that's quite skewed towards complex and ventricular ablation. Last year, I did the numbers. Last year, 65% of my ablations were ventricular. Wow. So that's, I know, unusual in the EP world. But, we've treated all arrhythmias with this. And in 2017, we published a large case series of atrial fibrillation ablation patients. Half were treated with manual catheters and half were treated robotically. So over 300 patients in each group with 1 year and 3 year outcomes that were identical, with procedure times that were identical, with lower fluoroscopy time in the robotic group, but really not much else that was different between the two. So it didn't prove that it was better at the time, but at the same time, it did make me convinced I was not doing anybody any disservice by pursuing this. That I felt very good about the fact that I could offer the patients an excellent procedure using robotics, and that this was just the very beginning, and that continuing to be dedicated, this is just the very beginning of robotics. If it's already equal, what will it be in the future? And I think that's what remains to be seen. In my day-to-day practice, though, it is an incredible tool for doing work like PVC ablation in particular, and ventricular ablation as well. The ability of the tool to navigate complex anatomy, to have excellent contact in challenging areas like the papillary muscles and working in the outflow tract region, really is unique, and I think fits my practice very well. Just to give you an example, in doing outflow tract PVCs, especially left ventricular outflow tract PVCs, where you have to work both below and above the aortic valve. And historically, we've always had to get arterial access in the groin and go retrograde aortic to above the aortic valve. I actually do all that work from a transeptal approach now. So I can do a transeptal puncture. I can actually map in the left ventricle and do ablation underneath the valve, but I can also then move the catheter from within the left ventricle back out the aorta and back down again. So you can actually work above the aortic valve as well, all without needing to get arterial access, for instance. Tomorrow, I'm going to be doing a congenital procedure where I'm actually going to access retrograde aortic to get to the congenital necessary positions in the patient's atrium, which have been through a switch procedure that could otherwise not be done. I've done a dozen now retrograde aortic pulmonary vein isolation procedures in patients that don't have a connected inferior vena cava. So these unique procedures really highlight the capabilities. But I also do have a strong belief that as an everyday tool, it is at least as good. And I think that over time, we will then have tools that make it better, quicker, safer, and all the things that are necessary to be a long-term player in the area.
Thank you for these insights. So my question is about the learning curve. After proceeding like 1,500 cases, what do you believe number of cases that regular physician performing VT or AF can make his own moves on the robotic navigation?
Yeah, the learning curve is actually relatively short. And I think that, of course, you do need to allow for some additional time early on, and that's probably the biggest challenge. The key to the learning curve is that it's safety and the fact that you can move the catheter anywhere you'd like. And as far as I know, in nearly 150,000 procedures, there's never been a mechanical perforation just because the catheter is soft. Okay, it just can't do that. And so once people feel free to move the catheter around without fear, the learning curve becomes very short. So I think in general, somewhere between 20, 30 procedures is enough to get quite comfortable. I think atrial fibrillation in its current form is a more difficult task. Certainly, folks who are used to using one-shot devices, whether they came up through the cryoballoon world and now into pulse field ablation, that's going to be a little different in that currently we only have a point-to-point tool. In fact, currently we still only have a point-to-point RF tool, right? And as far as the catheters for robotics, hopefully that will change very soon, that we'll actually have a pulse field opt-in as well with robotics. But I think for now, for atrial fibrillation, it's a bit of a tough ask. For ventricular ablation, however, and doing PDCs, et cetera, I think that within a couple dozen cases, operators can be very comfortable and can see the benefit. Another thing that has changed from that perspective is that very early on, we were sort of given the tool without much training, right? It's kind of like, here it is, do your best. And we've actually developed over the years now a well-developed, organized training program that includes work with a simulator device, et cetera, things to bring new operators along, as well as the network of senior operators through the Society of Cardiac Robotic Navigation and through other connections, where we can link up new users with more experienced users from anywhere around the world in order to help facilitate adoption. And I think that has proven to be very helpful. So there's many different aspects of this that facilitate that. We didn't yet touch upon the capabilities of this technology for remote medicine and remote procedures, et cetera. Yeah, we can certainly talk about that as well. There's really no limit geographically. I can get actually on my cell phone today and click an app that's been developed by the company and help a procedure that occurs in any robotic lab anywhere in the world. Okay, so it gives us the capability to support adoption anywhere that that is needed from that perspective. So I think that learning curve is not so much the issue. It's more a matter of the decision to make that happen in the hospitals.
Regarding decision to make that happen, you have administration experience in your background. Could you please help us understand from the perspective of administration, from the words like return on investment, how this technology must be considered? What are the time frames that this technology should work? And maybe what centers do not need this kind of technology from your personal view?
So, up until very recently, the limitations associated with a very large capital investment have really driven the decision making. And of course, there are not additional billing codes or anything like that associated with use of robotics in these procedures. So there is not a clear direct return on investment by doing a robotic procedure over doing a manual procedure. The key has really been the driving of marketplace presence, being seen as a center of excellence, being able to offer the most complex care for patients, where once you have those sort of halo procedures at your center and you're known in the community for providing that, then other volume follows. I will say that somewhere between 30 and 40% of my personal patients come referred by other electrophysiologists, not in our community. And I'm not really seen as a competitor, but instead as a resource in that way. And so because of that, we are getting patient volume that we would just not have at our hospital at all. And I think that's where the ROI comes from at this point. Again, there's not additional billing codes or anything like that that provide a case by case improvement in that way. We can look at the different dollars and cents that are involved with every single procedure and the various catheters that are used in the tools and the margin for any given procedure, but that's all something that can change case to case depending on what you use. So it's not too different that way either. So I think the argument really has been the offering of unique capabilities in your market and to be able to drive yourself to being the top provider of the most complex and best patient care in your market. Now, this is all poised to change in a major way because of the new Genesis X system that has been developed. And again, this is why this time frame now is more exciting than it's ever been. The current management of the company that's been in place for something like 7 years has really shifted the entire organization towards innovation. They were able to get out of the old relationships that limited their development of new technologies. We now have FDA approval for, and I think worldwide availability would be my expectation of what's now called the Genesis X system. And so the newest version of the robotic system, which we have called Genesis, is still a large capital equipment requiring the room to be constructed properly, shielded, et cetera. The new version of this can actually be installed in any lab in 3 days, does not require shielding. It actually shields itself, should be compatible with any X-ray vendor, and can be, again, taken in and out in just a few days. We actually had a fully functional system on the exhibit floor at HRS this past year. And in doing that, in addition to being able to be installed without needing a major build out of your lab and put into any lab, that obviously broadens the potential locations significantly, number one. Number two, at the same time, the company now has capability of making catheters and the other tools that are needed during a case. That gives them the opportunity to actually have some revenue based upon disposables that they never had before. And while this has not been fully fleshed out, we are currently working on a negotiation for trying to get Genesis X actually into our ambulatory surgical center even. It could go anywhere, really. And in a business organization, in a business deal that may not require such a big capital purchase, and instead a different model where the system, again, I don't know enough of the details yet, so I don't want to speak for the company on this, right? But the idea of needing a multi-million-dollar capital investment should be in the past, and that for very low outlay up front, and then a disposables kind of deal as things go along, that changes the entire economics of this. And I think that will be a very important option going forward. So in the past, hospitals, this was really limited to major medical centers doing complex work, no question about it, especially big VT centers. And so hospitals that I think this did not belong in or were unable to do so would be rural centers, smaller hospitals, et cetera. And frankly, a place that didn't have a dedicated user or two or three that were going to use it to its utmost. I think that is poised to change now that we have this capability of a system that can be installed very quickly for very low upfront cost. And I think this also opens the door to one of the most important parts of this, which is, can you then allow access to this advanced technology to underserved areas? Can we then have the tool, if you'd say in the perfect world, you'd like to use this tool to deliver care to underserved areas in any country, uh, whether it's Africa or underserved areas here in the US or anywhere in the world, honestly. In order to do that, you need the robotic system at the site of care. And so if it's a huge capital investment, that's going to be a very difficult thing to do. Now that we have the ability to have that be a lower barrier and all the capabilities of remote medicine that have existed actually from the very beginning with this platform, that really opens the door to that in the future. The other thing I'll mention is that this has always just been an electrophysiology tool. And so maybe it'd be helpful for me to share a bit of the conversations we've had. Mary Curie is the chief medical officer of Intuitive Surgical. And so I've had many conversations with her, and I believe she sits on the board now at Steritaxis. And I think that the journey of Intuitive Surgical and Da Vinci is instructive here from two different aspects. Number one is that tool was actually initially developed as a cardiac surgical tool, and actually really struggled early on as far as adoption and business growth. And they actually were not doing well at all. And then some innovative urologist decided to try it out for prostate surgery. And,
Okay.
fast forward, 10, 12 years, it has dominant market share in soft tissue, pelvic, and abdominal surgery. And so it really shifted its killer application from its initial vision in order to really find itself. And I'm curious to know where this is going to go, because soft tissue surgery heavily impacted by robotics with Da Vinci, et cetera. Orthopedics clearly heavily impacted already by robotics. We now have robotics involved with pulmonary interventions, with Monarch, et cetera. There has really not yet been robotics penetration into endovascular procedures of all kinds. And really, at this point, the only player in the game has been Steritaxis, and at this point, limited to electrophysiology. Along with this newer robotic platform system, the Genesis X, we also will now have microcatheters, wires, et cetera, a new user interface that's oriented towards other endovascular procedures, such as interventional radiology, neurointerventions, potentially interventional cardiology, et cetera. And so this also doesn't need to be limited to just electrophysiology. And I think that it'll be interesting to see if the killer application, what will be the prostate surgery for this technology, right? Will it turn out to be, or will it turn out to be something different? Just to give you an idea, here in our system where I live here in Arizona, we have our expert neurointerventionalists here in Phoenix, and we have satellite hospitals 4 hours away in smaller towns like Yuma. And currently,
Mm.
somebody having a stroke there has to be put on a plane or a helicopter and flown here, and then get their advanced neurointervention. But instead, if this system were local to their hospital, we could have a general interventional radiologist place sheaths and put catheters into the body. And then our experts here in Phoenix could actually get on the procedure remotely and do the complex neurointervention easily from Phoenix, and have the patient not need to travel and save all that time, money, brain cells, et cetera. And so I think if the economic barriers to that are lower, which they should be with the new system, then those type of capabilities will come to the fore. Not to mention the fact that the new system could be put on a truck and could go to Africa, or you could put one in your hospital where you are, and I could easily get on and actually help your local physicians do the work. So I think that we're on a precipice now of really shifting this whole concept. Is it only for EP? Can it be for all endovascular procedures? Is the economic barriers now low enough, and the diversity of tools going to allow for more diverse applications that really move endovascular procedures overall into the robotic age, which has to happen? I mean, there's no way that we should be doing this kind of work with our hands at some point as physicians. There's no endeavor where doing something like drawing circles inside the heart should be done by human hands. That's a repetitive motion. So, I can certainly even give you one sort of Mars mission, I guess. We think about what would the ultimate vision be as an example. And of course, you may
Please.
get there, you may not, but you learn a lot along the way. So interventional cardiology has now largely shifted to radial access in the arm, for
Correct.
instance, while in EP, we're still doing a lot of stuff from the leg. Also, here in the US, especially, we're starting to do more work in ambulatory settings. So we have our ambulatory surgical center settings, et cetera, but it would be of value to the hospital as well. I mentioned before that I'm fully capable of doing a retrograde aortic pulmonary vein isolation. So I can actually go through the artery of the leg, back around the aorta, down through the aortic valve, into the left ventricle, then back through the mitral valve to the left atrium and do ablation for atrial fibrillation. So I've done that a dozen times and have one plan. And typically we've done that for patients with abnormalities of their anatomy, such that I can't get up through their leg, like they have their inferior vena cava is not connected, for instance. But if you gave me, or a company gave me, a 6 French catheter, 6 or 7 French, but 6 French preferably catheter capable of point-to-point pulse field ablation, I could actually do a radial artery in the wrist, pulmonary vein isolation robotically. And the patient could walk out 1 hour later with just a wristband. Okay. And so you think what could happen there as far as being able to offer our patients safe, efficient work for something like atrial fibrillation ablation that could really shift the market. That would change everything. No several hours of lying down, allowing patients to have radial arm access. So anyway, I think that, and not only that, we should be able to have automation as well. Once we've actually then got the patient's anatomy integrated, whether it's from a pre-procedure CT scan or real-time ultrasound, whatever other technologies we will integrate with this, we should be able to put the catheter inside that chamber and just basically press play. And the system itself should be able to make those movements. And we've had some capability for that for many years already. It's just not fully built out yet. So I think the long run vision would be a radial artery, single catheter, no transeptal necessary, pulmonary vein isolation done with automation. And I think that would give us for a less than 1 hour procedure, and the patient walks out with a wristband an hour later, kind of thing. And centers that want to be on the cutting edge of that, then I think have a real opportunity. And I think that if you think about the Middle East and centers like, cities like yours, which have, all representation of and capabilities to obtain all the latest technology and offer it to your patients, being part of that world, I think would be exceptionally exciting. And now's a great time to get involved.
Dr. Weiss, in terms of great times, I'm thinking about new electrophysiologists, doctors, and the role of Cardiac Robotic Navigation Society. You, as one of the founders of this society, how do you see this platform? How do you see to connect these professionals? How it can help in mentorship? Could you please talk about that?
Yes. So certainly connecting the worldwide users is one aspect, and bringing along the newer generation is another key aspect. Again, like everything having to do with this technology, this has been a small but very dedicated group of worldwide users that have stayed connected over the years. And I think that has really helped this survive. And again, the key aspects will be growing this over time. But we've certainly moved forward in a couple of aspects. Number one is recognition by the other major societies. So in addition to our annual Society of Cardiac Robotic Navigation meetings that we have alternating between, at this point, Europe and the US, and will be our 10th annual meeting coming up in Warsaw, Poland, actually in October, we have now also been invited to and had joint sessions at Heart Rhythm meeting. This will be, I believe, the 4th now joint HRS SCRN session. They'll be in Chicago this year, a 90-minute session where we're able to share robotic experience and learnings with the entire HRS population there, and where we actually have representatives both from SCRN and HRS on the podium. So that's growing. We've been at Asia Pacific HRS as well. I've spoken at several times now at ACAS in China, for instance, as well. So I think representation and within the larger societies has actually been a key move to bring this into the mainstream. So that's part one as far as our presence on the bigger stage and growing the society. Continue to enroll new users and to offer experiences such as seminars on the web and that sort of thing. As far as training of the younger generation, we have also established pathways, at least here in the US, for a fellowship certificate of sorts, right? So robotic fellowship, where trainees, again, will go through a path of training using simulators and then a certain number of procedures where they eventually earn a robotics certificate. And many of our trainees from the various centers in the US have purposely sought out centers that have robotics for their job after training to continue that, or they've asked their centers to bring in robotics after. But that's, again, been a bit of a challenge because we just aren't as widespread as we need to be. But I think this is, again, the snowball effect that we'll need to do. So we are very focused on both of those aspects then, becoming more present on the worldwide stage in association with the major societies like HRS and APHRS, et cetera, as well as working at the institutional level and so society to bring along newer users and involve them as much as possible. Our meetings generally do include abstract submission competitions, that sort of thing, things that tend to bring younger users in. And we just need to keep doing more of that. So hopefully it'll continue to grow.
Thank you. And I have one more question that's the perspective from the patient side. What is a patient value from your perspective, and how we should inform patients about this technology? Do you believe patients today should be more informed about this advancement and how that must be performed? What is the correct communication source with the patient? Because nowadays patients are really interested and to understand what's going on.
Yeah, they're both interested and they actually have access to information like never before, obviously, right? And so I do think that we should be much more explicit about what we're doing with our technologies and the benefits it can provide to patients. I think there's a very clear message here from that perspective that especially for patients I see for, PVCs and ventricular arrhythmia and obviously complex congenital, adult congenital work, that sort of thing, there's a clear benefit. I mean, some of these procedures, like I described this adult congenital case that I'm going to do this week, it's really almost impossible to do otherwise. In fact, they had
Mm,
attempted procedures elsewhere where they couldn't cross the baffle, for instance, in order to get to the correct side of the heart. So a few of these type procedures, it's obvious the robotics has an advantage. But overall, as far as safety, as far as the expertise of the physician you're working with, I think all of these are a clear benefit to the robotics platform. And I think communicating that to patients is absolutely key. And once they understand that, they're actually quite interested, excited, motivated, feel comfortable that they're really receiving the highest level of potential care that exists. How to get the word out about that? Obviously in our clinic visits, we do talk about robotics, and many of my patients are actually specifically referred for that because of
uh,
just my position in our community, that people know I'm the robotics guy and do this complex work. So it kind of comes to me that way. But that's really not enough. We really need to get that out there to more broad fashion. So I actually personally think that number one, this is not so much in the markets that I've worked in, but some other markets in the US, there has been fairly aggressive marketing by the hospital systems, right? So they put up
mm,
billboards and had advertising directly to the community. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. A lot of medicine is done that way. You can't
mm,
watch anything on television without seeing advertisements for, various healthcare things. So I think it'd be fair to do more of that and get the word out directly to the patients and let them understand that. The other thing is to the medical community itself. And again, this is the role of the SRN and larger societies, but we didn't touch yet so much either on the user, the operator experience, the physician experience, the fact that I actually have not needed to stand there wearing lead for the last 20 years, like many of my partners have, but that I currently have partners who have neck and arm issues and back issues. Now, the idea of doing fluoroless EP is nothing new or unique to robotics at this point. So in general, the use of fluoroscopy has decreased markedly, but the majority of people still spend a lot of time standing there in lead, no question.
yeah.
And I think that that's an important aspect as well. It's also the case that when I'm doing my procedures now, I'm actually sitting in the control room in front of a large screen that has all of the information on it right in front of me. I also can have my fellow sitting shoulder to shoulder with me. So instead of, yelling back and forth instructions and that sort of thing, instead we're sitting shoulder to shoulder, learning the EP, focusing on the electrograms and all the other factors that we're seeing. My other staff people, my mapper, et cetera, are all right next to me. So it creates a very useful and functional team environment for providing high level care to the patients. So I think that, and it's an interesting thing. Some of that is actually facilitated not by the robotic system itself, and
Mm,
this might be a useful thing to differentiate as well. There's actually two different products that are associated with this company and this system. So one is the robotic system itself, which is the Genesis system that drives the robotic catheter and catheters. And in addition, we now have a multiple mapping catheter, and we're working with strategic partners to develop more of that. So that's one. The other is what is now being called the Synchrony Sync form. And so we've actually had what was called Odyssey before, and this is the flat panel display that has been part of the Stereotaxis offering from the very beginning. And in fact, our prior labs where I worked in Salt Lake City, we had three labs. Only one had the robotic system, but all three had this Odyssey system. Every company has a big flat panel display where you can actually show all the different, audiovisual inputs that are necessary for a procedure. Your mapping system, pacing recording system, cardiac echo, X-ray. All these things can be put onto one consolidated screen provided by anybody. But
mhm,
the difference has always been that we actually have mouse control, meaning that when we actually move our mouse, into a different pane on that system, you're actually inside the native system. So sitting on my big flat panel, if I move my mouse into the mapping system, I control the mapping system. I can control the pacing recording system. Okay. So none of the other systems have been capable of this
Yeah.
until very recently. And we've been had that capability again for 15 plus years. That's what's allowed remote procedures, because you can do a secure VPN connection into that Odyssey system from anywhere and control the robotic system. So that's why the first remote procedure was done in 2006 by Carlo Poponi from the podium in Boston on a patient in Milan. And just, let's see, we had our record breaking remote procedure done from our meeting in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago to Shanghai. So we had our Shanghai physician in Washington, D.C., who operated to Shanghai. The information had to go from Washington, D.C. to Shanghai and back, and it averaged less than 500 milliseconds as far as communication. And that was using the hotel's free Wi-Fi. No special hookups, no satellite stuff, no whatever. And again, we're not using sharp cutting instruments like you would for regular surgery. We're using a soft catheter that is atraumatic, et cetera. So I think that the potential for that type of remote surgeries is key, but it also allows for all of that information to be shared in one location that again really facilitates training of new users, interoperability between physicians. We actually operate in these silos. It's very
Mm.
unique actually, the work that we do in that way. If you are working in a news organization or if you're working in a technology company, there's a lot of opportunities to facilitate interaction with each other, to come up with ideas as a group, to work on projects as a group, et cetera. But in medicine and our procedure rooms, we're actually very isolated in silos. We don't really have easy capability of asking for help or working with partners or sharing that knowledge between different locations. And in this circumstance, we now have technology that really breaks down those geographical barriers if we are able to make use of this. So I think that's another key aspect.
I want to thank you from the community side for everything you do. One last question, a little maybe personal to close. What is life lesson or piece of advice that has shaped you who you are today?
That's a great question. I think the key is, and I've thought about this a lot recently as well. I like to think of it as playing, and this is not unique to me or even the language, but the idea of playing the infinite game, okay,
Mm.
as opposed to the right now, which has a lot of meanings. And game being life in general, not in a just fun sense, but everything we do. It has to do with having a larger vision that gives you the driving basic principles and foundational principles. These include, of course, understanding that what we do in medicine in particular is about people. It's not, the technology is a tool. The people
Mm.
are the actual important aspect here. And we want to keep that first and foremost. What can we do to optimize the care of our patients in that way through the use of technologies? The next would be being patient and having that larger vision and understanding that these things can take quite a while to evolve. And this is one particular story again, which has been evolving for almost 20 years and is far from where it needs to be. Yet I'm still very optimistic that in my career lifetime that we'll see incredible advancement in this way. So I think that sort of patience and understanding that vision is key. Associated with that would be having sort of a long-term goal in mind. I mentioned that sort of Mars mission, idea, but the key isn't necessarily getting to Mars. The key is what lessons do you learn along the way? Okay, because all of the building blocks that it takes to eventually achieve that longer mission are valuable in themselves, and they may actually change what that long-term mission looks like, of course. But without that long-term mission in mind, you won't have that motivation and drive to adventure all along the road, right? While at the same time being not so focused on that mission that you're not willing to take detours along the way into promising avenues. So I think keeping human beings first and foremost, and then using technology to help provide the optimal care for those folks. I think all the time about how I want my family treated, of course, my loved ones, my
Yeah,
friends, and at the same time, how to drive technology forward and understand it just won't get there unless we have dedication and that sort of long-term vision.
that's
I
great.
think those are the key things. And I'd love to see this, in your part of the world, for instance. And I think that now we have the opportunity to really offer that, in a way that we never did before. I'll throw one more thing out there about the remote medicine piece of this puzzle. Again, why are we so isolated? And there's two different things that could happen there. Number one would be clearly to go to underserved areas. And so, can we help take care of folks that cannot get even a basic ablation? Can we park a truck with this outside of some of the towns in Africa, right? And take care of a lot of folks that don't have access. The other end of the spectrum from a business perspective is, could this be at a place like where you are, or I don't know, Singapore, wherever it might be, and become a site for, medical tourism? And in that sense too, to be able to offer expert care, from anywhere in the world, for instance, right? And that might bolster the business model, for instance. So I think we really need to think outside the box as far as all that goes. But it's a very exciting time.
Thank you, doctor. It's a very exciting time. Thank you for your expertise, and thank you for everything you do.
Thank you for offering this. I'm very excited to be able to do this with you, and obviously happy to answer any further questions if things come up later. Let me know. I can help. Appreciate it.